I still remember the sound of her laugh that night, sharp and cutting in a way I had never heard before. It wasn't her usual warm laugh, the one that had once pulled me in like gravity back in the summer of 2009 when we met at a 4th of July barbecue in my buddy Ryan's backyard. No, this one was different. This one carried something darker in it, like mockery dressed up as humor. And the thing is, the more I replay that moment in my head, the more I realize it wasn't just a laugh. It was the sound of a crack forming in the life I thought I had built. The hotel bill was lying there on the kitchen counter, a crisp white piece of paper against the dull speckled granite we'd had since we bought the house in 2016. Her purse had spilled open when she tossed it down too carelessly, the strap catching on the corner of the counter. I hadn't been snooping. I hadn't gone looking for trouble. But trouble has a way of showing up whether you're ready for it or not, and that slip of paper was all it took for everything I thought I knew to start unraveling. But before I dive into that night, I should probably rewind. Because if you don't understand who I was before, or who she was to me, then the whole thing won't make sense. You'll just think I'm another guy who couldn't hold his marriage together. And maybe I am, but to me, it feels bigger than that. My name's Daniel. I'm 41 now, though back when all this began, I was 38. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place where high school football games still felt like the center of the universe on Friday nights. I wasn't much of a player myself. I was a wiry kid with more brains than brawn, but I loved the noise, the lights, the smell of popcorn and diesel from the buses parked just outside the field. My dad used to tell me, "Danny, you've got a head for the long game. Don't waste it." And for the most part, I didn't. I worked my way through college, landed a decent job in IT consulting, and by my early 30s, I was making enough to live comfortably. And then there was Emily. God, even saying her name now stirs something complicated in my chest. She was magnetic in the way some people just are. You couldn't walk into a room she was in without noticing her. Dark brown hair, the kind that shimmered like it had strands of copper in the sunlight, and these sharp green eyes that always looked like they were a step ahead of you. We met in 2009, like I said during that barbecue. She was a friend of a friend, and I remember she had on this navy sundress with tiny white flowers. She laughed at something stupid I said, something about the burgers being so dry they could double as hockey pucks, and I swear it felt like the world tilted just a little in my direction. We dated, fell in love, got married in 2012 in a small ceremony at a vineyard just outside Cincinnati. It wasn't fancy, but it felt right. We were partners, teammates, or at least that's how it felt back then. We bought our first home in 2016, a 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood where kids still rode bikes until the streetlights came on. For years, we were just solid. We didn't have kids, though not for lack of trying. That was a sore spot, one we didn't always talk about. But still, we had each other. Or so I thought. The first red flag, if I'm being honest with myself, came in early 2021. COVID had already thrown everyone's lives into chaos. Remote work, Zoom fatigue, the endless cycle of bad news on TV, it wore us all down. Emily had started working longer hours, or at least that's what she said. She was in marketing for a pharmaceutical company, and it made sense at first. I told myself she was under pressure, that the pandemic had reshaped her job just like it had reshaped mine. But sometimes when she'd come home late, her excuses felt too thin, too rehearsed. There was one night, I think it was October of that year, when she walked in around 11:30 p.m. The smell of perfume hit me before I even looked up from the couch. It wasn't hers, at least not the one I knew. Emily had always been a Marc Jacobs Daisy kind of woman, light, floral, almost innocent. But this was heavier, musky, like something you'd wear to a dimly lit bar where no one knew your name. When I asked about it, she just shrugged and said her coworker had been testing samples from a client. I wanted to believe her. I did, and I let it go. The months rolled by. 2022 came and things started feeling more and more off. She'd guard her phone in a way she never used to, turning the screen away from me even if it was just a notification from DoorDash. She started dressing differently too. Not all the time, but on those so-called work trips, she'd pack clothes I hadn't seen her wear in years. Tighter dresses, heels that had been gathering dust in the back of her closet. I told myself she was rediscovering herself after the slump of the pandemic, that maybe she just wanted to feel attractive again. But deep down, I knew something wasn't adding up. Still, I clung to the idea of us. I thought about all the Thanksgivings we'd hosted, the camping trips we'd taken to Hocking Hills, the lazy Sundays binge-watching The Crown while eating takeout Chinese straight from the cartons. You don't just throw away a decade of shared memories. At least, I didn't think you did. Looking back now, I realize I was willfully blind. It's funny how the brain works. It shows you what you want to see and blurs the edges of everything else. Then came the night with the hotel bill. It was February 2023. Cold. Bitterly cold, the kind of Ohio winter that sinks into your bones. She came home late again, tossed her purse onto the counter, and went upstairs without so much as a hello. I was cleaning up after dinner when I noticed the purse tipped over, a few things spilling out. Lipstick, her wallet, a folded piece of paper. At first, I didn't think twice, but something about the bold black lettering at the top caught my eye. Hilton Garden Inn, downtown Columbus. My heart skipped. I picked it up, hands suddenly clammy. The charges were for a 2-night stay, February 10th to February 12th. Room service, wine, valet parking. 2 nights that she had told me she was in Cleveland for a client meeting. When she came back downstairs, I asked. Just asked? Not accusatory, not yelling. Just, "Hey, what's this about?" And that's when she laughed. That laugh has haunted me ever since. It wasn't nervous or apologetic. It wasn't the laugh of someone caught in an awkward misunderstanding. No, it was sharp, dismissive, like I was some idiot child who had wandered into a grown-up conversation. She waved her hand, said something about how I was overreacting, how she and a few coworkers had decided to split a hotel room after a conference because it was easier than driving home late. But her laugh lingered in the air longer than her words did. And in that moment, something inside me cracked, because I realized that laugh wasn't just about the hotel bill. It was about me. It was about the way she had started looking at me like I was less than, like I wasn't someone she had chosen all those years ago under the July fireworks. That's when I knew, deep down, that I couldn't just let this go. And that's where the story really begins. After that night with the laugh, I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. It clung to me in every quiet moment like a shadow I couldn't get rid of. I'd sit at my desk during the day, staring at endless lines of code or responding to clients. But my brain would drift back to that hotel receipt, to the sharpness of her laugh, and the way she dismissed me like I was some fool not worth the truth. I tried to tell myself to let it go, to focus on work, on anything else. But the thing about suspicion is, it multiplies. Once it takes root, every little thing looks like evidence. Every late night at the office, every unexplained charge on her credit card, every time she came home smelling faintly of perfume or alcohol, my mind started connecting dots that maybe weren't even there, but I couldn't stop. By March of 2023, I was sleeping less, eating less. I'd lie awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the furnace and her even breathing beside me. I wondered if she was dreaming of me or of someone else. That thought made me physically sick. One night, around mid-March, she told me she'd be gone for another conference in Cleveland. She gave me the dates, April 6th through 8th. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep living in this fog of doubt anymore. I needed proof, one way or another. I thought about hiring a private investigator, the way people in movies do, but that felt both dramatic and expensive. Instead, I decided to take matters into my own hands. It started small. I checked our shared bank account more closely. I tracked her phone location once using the Find My app, though she had started turning that feature off more often. I looked through old credit card statements, cross-referencing charges with her supposed work trips, and then I did something I never thought I would do. I went to the Hilton Garden Inn downtown, the same one from that receipt. It was March 25th, a Saturday. I remember because March Madness was in full swing, and the lobby TV was playing a game between Kansas and Arkansas. I sat there pretending to scroll my phone, but really I was working up the nerve to ask the front desk about her. When I finally did, I used the excuse that I had misplaced a receipt and wanted to confirm the dates of a past stay. The young woman behind the desk typed quickly, her nails clicking against the keys. "Emily Sanders?" she asked. My stomach dropped. "Yes. 2 nights, February 10th and 11th. Checked out the 12th. She said it so casually, like it was nothing. Just data in a system. I swallowed hard, forced a smile, and walked out before she could ask any questions. That was confirmation. Not of everything, but enough. Enough to know she wasn't where she said she was. Enough to know I wasn't crazy. The days leading up to her supposed Cleveland trip in April felt endless. I went through the motions, work, groceries, bills, but inside I was unraveling. Every little interaction with her felt staged, rehearsed. She'd kiss me on the cheek before leaving for work, but it felt like muscle memory, not love. I'd catch her smiling at her phone, and she'd quickly turn the screen away. When April 6th rolled around, she packed her bag. I watched her fold a silk blouse I hadn't seen in years, one she used to wear when we were first dating. My chest ached with a mix of nostalgia and anger. She left around 6 p.m., kissed me on the cheek, said she'd call when she got to Cleveland. She never called. That night I drove to the Hilton Garden Inn again. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs from the inside. I parked a block away, walked to the entrance, and slipped into the lobby like I belonged there. The place smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee, the kind of sterile scent every hotel has. The hum of voices, the ding of the elevator, the shuffle of luggage wheels, it all felt louder than it should have. I told myself I was crazy, that she wouldn't be here again, that lightning didn't strike twice, but then I saw her. She walked through the lobby doors with a man I had never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe early 40s. He had that polished look like he lived in tailored suits and knew his way around an expensive bottle of scotch. Emily was laughing. God, laughing. Her hand brushing against his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. My stomach dropped. My whole body went cold. I ducked behind one of those decorative plants, my heart racing so fast I thought it might give me away. They didn't notice me. They walked straight to the elevators, her hand slipping into his like it was second nature. I stood there, frozen, while the elevator doors closed. That image burned into me. The casual intimacy. The betrayal wrapped in laughter. It was worse than anything I had imagined. I don't even remember how I got home that night. I just know I drove in a daze, my vision blurry, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I stumbled inside, collapsed onto the couch, and sat there in the dark until the sun started to rise. The next morning, I knew I couldn't confront her empty-handed. She was too good at twisting things, at laughing off my questions. I needed undeniable proof, so I went back to the hotel. This time, I asked about security footage. The front desk attendant, different from the one before, told me they couldn't release anything without proper authorization. But desperation does strange things to a man. I slipped him a $100 bill, told him I just needed confirmation for personal reasons. He hesitated, then nodded. 10 minutes later, I was in a small office with a grainy black and white screen, and there they were, Emily and the man, checking in, laughing, touching, leaning into each other like they'd been together for years. The footage showed them heading to the elevators, disappearing up to the rooms. It was like watching my entire marriage dissolve in real time. I left that hotel with the footage burned into my memory, my phone buzzing in my pocket from texts I couldn't bring myself to read. She thought she was in control, thought she could keep lying, keep laughing at me like I was some fool. But now I had the truth, and nothing would ever be the same again. The thing about proof is, it doesn't set you free right away. I thought that once I had seen the footage, once I had undeniable confirmation of what I already knew deep down, I'd feel a sense of clarity, relief even. But instead it was like swallowing broken glass. It cut on the way down and stayed lodged inside me, sharp and jagged, slicing every time I tried to breathe. For a week after, I carried that footage in my mind like a hidden weapon. I didn't confront her. I couldn't. Not yet. Every time she walked through the door, tossing her keys onto the counter, Every time she kissed me goodnight or asked me about my day, I felt like I was living in some warped play where she knew her lines and I didn't. She laughed at my jokes. She folded our laundry. She even suggested we go visit her parents for Easter. And the whole time, I kept seeing her hand slip into his in that hotel lobby. It made me paranoid, angry. Small things set me off. Her phone lighting up across the room, a whiff of perfume that didn't belong, the way she hummed while cooking like nothing was wrong. I started withdrawing. Skipping meals, avoiding eye contact, spending hours locked in my office pretending to work. She noticed, of course, but she didn't push too hard. Maybe she thought I was just stressed. Maybe she didn't care enough to dig. By mid-April, I was unraveling. My performance at work slipped. I missed a client deadline for the first time in years, and my boss, Mark, pulled me aside. He said I seemed distracted, asked if everything was all right at home. I wanted to tell him, wanted to just spill it all, but the words stuck in my throat. How do you say out loud that your wife of 11 years is sleeping with someone else? That you have video evidence of it? Saying it would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. Instead, I nodded, muttered something about just tired, and went back to my desk. The isolation was crushing. I didn't tell my friends, didn't tell my family. My parents are in their late 70s, and I couldn't bear the thought of my mother looking at me with pity. My dad, stoic, old school, would have told me to man up or fix it, like Betrayal was a leaky faucet you could just tighten with the right wrench. And my friends? Most of them were married with kids, busy with soccer practices and mortgage payments. I didn't want to be the guy who dropped a bomb in the middle of their normal lives, so I kept it inside. But keeping it inside has consequences. I started drinking more. Nothing dramatic at first. Just a beer with dinner, then another, then one while I sat in the dark after she went to bed. But soon it became the only way I could quiet the noise in my head. The fridge became my escape, the bottle my closest confidant. One night around the end of April, I stumbled into the bathroom around 2 a.m. and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, skin pale, stubble uneven on my jaw. I looked older, weaker, like someone I barely recognized. That scared me more than anything. Meanwhile, Emily carried on as if nothing had changed. Or maybe, in her world, nothing had. She kept up the act flawlessly. Weekend brunches, grocery runs, texts with little heart emojis. But I noticed the details. She was on her phone more than ever, smiling at messages she never shared with me. She started staying late at work again, though now I knew what work really meant. And when I tried to touch her, to hold her hand or kiss her like I used to, she'd stiffen, just enough for me to feel the rejection. The house became suffocating. Every corner reminded me of us. Our wedding photos in the hallway, the paint color we argued about in the living room, the dent in the couch cushion where she always curled up to read. It all felt tainted now. A museum of lies. By May, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront her. Not with the footage yet, but with words. I rehearsed it in my head 100 times. Calm, measured, just asking her to come clean. I chose a Friday evening, thinking we'd have the whole weekend to talk, to maybe, just maybe, figure out what came next. But when I asked her directly if there was someone else, she didn't cry. She didn't deny it outright. She just looked at me, her green eyes colder than I'd ever seen them, and said I was imagining things. That I was paranoid. She turned it back on me, accused me of being controlling, insecure, even jealous. It was gaslighting, pure and simple. And the worst part was, for a brief second, I almost believed her. That's the power she had over me. After that, I stopped trying to confront her. The conversation left me drained, hollowed out. It also made me realize that no matter what I said, no matter how directly I asked, she would never admit it. She was too deep in it now, too committed to the lie. So I started planning. Quietly, carefully. I backed up all our bank statements, took screenshots of suspicious charges, and saved them to a hidden folder on my laptop. I kept the security footage fresh in my memory, like a loaded gun I hadn't fired yet. I started looking at our finances differently too, calculating what I could handle on my own, what debts we had, how the house might be divided. I also started journaling. I don't know why. Maybe because writing it out felt like a release, or maybe because I wanted a record of everything in case I ever doubted myself. Late at night, I'd pour my thoughts into a cheap spiral notebook, scribbling until my hand cramped. Anger, grief, confusion, despair, and it all went onto those pages. Sometimes I'd tear them out and burn them in the fireplace just to watch the words turn to ash. The hardest part, though, was the loneliness. Being in the same house with her, sharing meals, sharing a bed, and knowing she was sharing herself with someone else, that kind of loneliness cuts deeper than being alone. At least when you're alone, you know where you stand. With her, I was invisible in my own life. By June, I was a shell of myself. Friends invited me to cookouts, to baseball games, but I always made excuses. My work suffered. My health suffered. I stopped going to the gym, stopped caring about what I ate, stopped calling people back. Every day felt like trudging through wet cement, heavy and exhausting. But even in that fog, something inside me was shifting. Anger was slowly overtaking despair. I started to think less about why she did it, and more about what I was going to do about it. Because one thing had become clear. I couldn't keep living like this. The marriage I thought I had was gone, replaced by something hollow and poisonous, and the only way out was through confrontation, through truth. The footage was still in my back pocket, waiting, and I knew the day would come when I'd use it. By late June, I had a plan. Not a fully formed, perfect plan, because I don't think anyone ever really has one in situations like this, but enough to feel like I could breathe again. The anger inside me had crystallized into something sharp and focused. Despair had been replaced by purpose. If I was going to survive this betrayal, I needed to take control. Not just emotionally, but strategically. The first step was distance. I started carving out little pockets of separation from her without making it obvious. I'd leave the house earlier than her in the mornings, not say much when she came back late from work events, and spend more evenings at the office or the library. I told myself it was for my sanity, but in reality, I was positioning myself to act without being emotionally hijacked by her presence. Next, I reached out to a lawyer. I told him I wasn't ready to file for divorce yet. I wasn't ready for that kind of confrontation. But I wanted advice on how to protect myself financially, legally, and emotionally if it came to it. That step alone gave me a strange sense of empowerment. For months, I had been reactive, letting her lies dictate my world. Now, I was proactive. But the real shift came one night in early July. I had been reviewing the security footage again just to steel myself, and I noticed something I hadn't before. The timestamps showed her arriving at the hotel before the man and leaving after him. It was a subtle thing, but it spoke volumes about the dynamics of their relationship. She wasn't just a casual fling. She was actively engaged, orchestrating the encounters. That realization sparked something in me. I wasn't going to just survive this. I was going to make sure the truth could never be hidden again. I started small, testing the waters. I casually asked her about her work trips, about colleagues she mentioned, about events she claimed to have attended. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse her. I just asked questions, paid attention to her reactions, and logged inconsistencies. Every hesitation, every vague answer, every change in tone was like adding a brick to a wall of undeniable evidence. One night, mid-July, she came home smelling like that musky perfume again. I didn't say anything. I watched her from the couch pretending to read a book, noting every detail. The way she moved, the way her eyes darted when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the faint indentation on her ring finger where her wedding band had been pushed aside. I wanted her to know, on some level, that I saw everything, that I wasn't blind anymore. I also started rebuilding myself. I hit the gym again, ran longer distances than I had in years, and started eating better. I wanted to be sharp, alert, capable, not for her, not to win her back, but for me. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of pride, something I hadn't felt since before all this began. Then came the real turning point. I finally decided it was time to confront her with the evidence. Not in anger, not in a fit of desperation, but strategically. I waited for a Sunday afternoon when she was home alone, thinking it was just another quiet weekend. I had the security footage downloaded onto a USB drive, backed up in 2 different places. I had screenshots of hotel charges, text messages, every little piece I had painstakingly gathered. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat her down in the living room, pulled out the USB, and placed it on the coffee table between us. Her eyes flicked to it, and I swear, for a split second, something passed over her face. Fear, maybe, or the tiniest crack in her carefully constructed mask. I didn't say a word. I just waited. She laughed. At first, just a nervous, startled laugh. Then, when she saw the USB drive, her laugh faltered. Her green eyes, once so full of life, now looked almost glassy, uncertain. And that's when I spoke. Calmly, deliberately, "This is everything. Every lie, every trip, every night you told me you were working late. I have it all." She opened her mouth, probably to deny, to deflect, to charm. But the truth was unyielding. I could see it in the slight tremor in her hands, the way she avoided my gaze. For hours, we sat in silence. I let her squirm, let her stew in the weight of what I had uncovered. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth was a hammer, and it had done its work. After a while, she broke down. Not fully. She still tried to justify herself, to make excuses, but for the first time, she couldn't maintain the illusion of innocence. It was like peeling off layers of paint to reveal a rotten wall beneath. And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming myself, my dignity, my life. The days that followed were tense. She tried to salvage what remained of our marriage, but I had changed. I was no longer the man who would bend over backwards to ignore red flags or believe convenient lies. I was watching, calculating, ready to make decisions that were best for me. I also started sharing small truths with close friends, though carefully. Not to humiliate her, not to gossip, but to rebuild a support system I had neglected during the months of doubt and fear. Those conversations, honest and raw, reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I had people who would stand by me no matter what. By mid-August, the shift was undeniable. I felt a strange mix of grief and liberation. Grief for what I had lost and liberation because I had finally taken control. For the first time since February, I felt the stirrings of hope. Not that our marriage would survive, but that I would. That I could emerge from this betrayal stronger, sharper, and more aware of my own worth. And that's when I made my final move. I filed for divorce, cleanly, decisively, with all the evidence I had collected. Not out of spite, but to protect myself. To make sure the lies could never shadow me again. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, signing those papers, handing over half my life in a few signatures, but it was also one of the most empowering. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for clarity. For peace. For the knowledge that betrayal might break a marriage, but it doesn't have to break the person who's betrayed. And for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. After the divorce papers were filed, life didn't suddenly become easier. It wasn't like in movies where the betrayal is exposed, the villain is vanquished, and the hero walks into the sunset with a newfound grin. No, reality is messier, slower, and far more complicated. But there's a strange clarity that comes when the fog finally lifts. I had taken the hardest steps, and the weight of the secret I'd been carrying for months was finally off my chest. The weeks following the filing were surreal. I stayed in the house alone for the first time in over a decade, wandering through the rooms that once felt like shared sanctuaries, but now felt like hallways of memory and loss. The smell of her perfume lingered faintly in the living room, the faint imprint of her slippers on the carpet, the corner of the bed still slightly indented where she slept. For the first few nights, I slept with the lights on, the TV blaring, trying to push away the emptiness that pressed in from all sides. But even in that emptiness, there was a subtle, almost imperceptible feeling of liberation. I could rearrange the furniture without explanation, cook whatever I wanted without compromise, and walk into any room without the constant tension of hiding my thoughts or feelings. Every small act of independence felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I had almost forgotten existed. Friends stepped in, cautiously at first, unsure how to approach me without reopening wounds. But gradually they became anchors. My buddy Ryan, who had introduced Emily and me 14 years earlier, sat with me for hours on end in my living room, drinking cheap beer and reminiscing about simpler times, before eventually asking the tough questions. And I answered, finally, out loud, without shame. I told him everything, every lie, every red flag, every gut-wrenching night of doubt. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that the private journaling and secret footage never could. And with each retelling, the weight lifted slightly, the jagged edges of my anger smoothing out just enough to breathe again. I also started paying attention to myself in ways I hadn't for years. I ran longer, lifted heavier, focused on the parts of me that had nothing to do with anyone else. I started taking weekend trips alone, something I'd never done before. My first was a drive down to Hocking Hills, where Emily and I had gone camping years ago. Standing at the edge of Old Man's Cave, feeling the wind and the wet scent of moss and earth, I realized I wasn't running from the past. I was walking toward a version of myself that had been buried under grief and betrayal. Then, slowly, the anger and betrayal transformed into a strange kind of compassion. Not for her, not for the man she had betrayed me with, but for myself. I had survived emotional chaos, gaslighting, and humiliation. I had seen the truth, faced it, and acted decisively. And more than that, I had refused to let the betrayal define me. By the time the divorce was finalized in late September 2023, I felt different. Not lighter, not completely healed, but stronger. More aware of my boundaries, my worth, and my capacity to endure. The house was quiet now, no hidden whispers, no late-night laughter that wasn't meant for me. And in that quiet, I discovered a strange sense of peace. I kept the security footage. I never used it to humiliate or punish, but I kept it as a reminder. Proof that I had seen clearly, that I had acted with integrity, and that sometimes the harshest truths are also the most liberating. It became a symbol not of revenge, but of clarity and agency. Over the next few months, I reconnected with old friends, rebuilt relationships I had neglected, and even started dating again, cautiously, carefully. I met a woman named Claire in November 2023 at a local bookstore. She's nothing like Emily, warm, open, patient, and genuinely curious about life. We started slowly, sharing coffee, walks in the park, late-night texts that never carried the weight of deceit. I didn't rush. I couldn't. But I could see, in the small ways she smiled, that trust was possible again. Looking back, I realize now that the betrayal was a rupture. Yes, but it was also a catalyst. It forced me to confront realities I had been avoiding. About her, about our marriage, and about myself. I learned to recognize my own patterns, my own blind spots, and my own capacity for endurance. I learned that love, when it's real, doesn't hurt in the same way. And I learned that betrayal, as devastating as it feels, doesn't have to annihilate your soul. I also learned something else, that laughter can cut deeper than any words, especially when it's the kind that once felt safe, familiar, and loving. That sound of Emily's laugh, the one that cut through me in February, will never leave me entirely. But now, it doesn't control me. It reminds me of the man I was, the pain I survived, and the life I reclaimed. By the time 2024 rolled around, I was living fully in my own skin again. The mornings were mine, the evenings mine, the small victories mine. And as I stood in the kitchen one Sunday morning, making coffee and listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, I realized I could finally smile, not because I was over her, not because I had forgotten, but because I had chosen myself. And in that moment, I knew something important. Betrayal can destroy a life, but it can also illuminate it. It can show you the fragility of trust, the depth of your own resilience, and the beauty of reclaiming your story. I still think about her sometimes, about the laughter and lies, about what might have been. But now, those thoughts are tempered by gratitude. Gratitude for the clarity, for the strength, and for the reminder that even when people hurt you in ways you never imagined, the power to heal and move forward always lies within you, and that's the story. the long, painful, messy story of betrayal, discovery, and reclamation. A story of losing and finding myself, of heartbreak and survival, and of realizing that sometimes the greatest love you can ever have is the one you give yourself.